Family pride. I have often asked others and tried to figure out myself what makes family pride. I haven't yet put my finger on it, but I know I have it. I've heard the way my older brothers and sisters talked, and it was unmistakable. This day, as I write about things in my life and in what I have been told, I feel the pride myself. I am inspired by what some of the ancestors did in the face of hardship that has made available to me the life I have. My great-grandfather immigrated from Prussia in the 1840s and experienced illness so severe he couldn't work, which led him to pawn his clothes for room and board. When he recovered, he worked as a hired farmhand for a couple years, then sent for and married my great-grandmother, whom he had met on the ship crossing the ocean. With her, they homesteaded in Illinois, and after 4 years had his farm taken away when it was found that the title was not clear. He tried again and succeeded, and over the years bought more land that totaled 720 acres. When he died, he was recognized as the richest man in Troy Grove Township. A life from pawning his clothes to the richest man in the area. His daughter, Helena, my mother's mother, had 8 children when her husband at age 37 was killed in a farm accident. Even though being deaf, she continued on and left each of those children a farm for them to get started on. My mother was one of the recipients. The house was very old and in need of repair. My mom and dad bought a house which was the priest's rectory a 1.5 miles down the road. A new brick rectory had been built to match the new brick school on the other side of the church. This all took place approximately 25 years before I was born. I was able to date this by visiting with my second oldest brother, Roger, before he died. He was born in 1915 and remembers that he was about 5 years old. He said they dug a basement, built a foundation, and moved the big 2-story house the 1.5 miles up the road from the church. It was jacked up, and railroad ties or some kind of big wooden beams were placed under it. It was then placed on big round logs or poles and rolled up the road pulled by a team of horses. As a log rolled out the back, they would stop and carry it forward and put it under again, repeating the process until they reached the destination. He was allowed to ride on a front beam and experience the whole operation. He felt it was a big and exciting happening. I am sure it was. How many neighbors were helping or how many men it took to do that, I do not know. Cross beams, rails lengthwise, and poles rolling on the ground. This is one of the things my folks did that I think was extraordinary. I feel blessed and proud of these ancestors. Then add all the stories I've written about my mother and father, taking Joe Dunn on probation, Slauterhouse Joe, legislating in the House of Representatives for his constituents. All signs of character, plus the fun we had growing up, roller skating in the parlor, basketball in the chandelier, singing around the piano, and the shanty in Stremlau's backyard. History, memories, legacy, pride. Bernie. This story came about when at our writing group they suggested for the next week the topic, a character. I titled this, A Character, My Father. When I read and digested what Webster said about character, I remembered some people from my life that I thought had character or were characters. One stood out loud and bright, like the high-powered light beams employed by a business at grand openings, penetrating the darkness all the way to the clouds above, and the sound of the River City All-Boys Brass Band in their new bright red and white uniforms pouring out of the school door, down the steps onto the street while playing 76 trombones from the Music Man. Loud and clear, I couldn't miss it. My father fits many of the different definitions of character by Webster. Joe Stremlau. Moral quality, reputation, good repute, the accounting of qualities or peculiarities, status or capacity. His first 5 children were boys, and when they were old enough to do most of the farming, he had a job off the farm, a second income. For his first job, he was hired to manage the Peterstown elevator, and it was a farmer-owned grain company in our community, where he was well known and recognized to have the qualities defined by Webster. His whole life was a display of character in different ways. When he was deputy sheriff for the county, in order to keep a young man arrested for car theft from going to prison on his first offense, he offered to the judge to give the man probation, and he brought Joe Dunn home to live with our family on the farm. Mercy displayed and courage to act on his convictions. The last time I saw Joe Dunn was about 7 years after he was released to his parents, having fulfilled the parole requirements. One Easter Sunday morning after we had been home from Mass, 10 or 10:30, this strange car, not from the neighborhood, drove into our yard. It was Joe Dunn with his beautiful wife and 2 children, ages 3 and 5. He was on his way home to his folks' house for Easter dinner. He had a good job and living in Chicago. We lived about 12 miles from his folks. They didn't stay long. In fact, they never even came into the house. He just wanted to stop and say once again, "Thank you for giving me the second chance for a beautiful life." That was my dad, character. My dad gave patriotic talks about the flag and freedom throughout the area. He loved America. His father and mother immigrated here from Germany and Poland. He was a gifted public speaker and down-to-earth, common-sense person. Peculiar? A character. Joseph P. Stremlau was elected to the legislature in Illinois as a Democrat in a Republican-dominated district. Known for his reputable character, he served 18 years in the House of Representatives. He was a family man and proud of every one of his 11 children. Every year at the Jackson Day dinner, a big Democratic fundraising event, he bought tickets for each of his children and spouses to fill several tables. During his speech, he would introduce each as he went around the tables. I think it's why he had the reputation of being a family man, and very proud of it. When his country called, he became an internal revenue agent during the Second World War, when there was a shortage of good and properly educated men to fill the position. Qualifications included having a college degree. My dad didn't graduate from 8th grade. He quit school that fall at the start of 8th grade and went and got a job as a hired hand on a farm. Integrity, self-reliance, dedicated to learning, and he was trusted. When he left the IRS, he continued keeping abreast of new and changing tax laws, opened his own office in Mendota, and did income tax work for the public until he died at age 79. These are a few examples of what my father was made of. He had character and was a character as defined by Webster. Bernie, the youngest of his 11 children. Joe Stremlau, known as Slauterhouse Joe. At the time I started high school in 1948, he ran for the legislature in the state of Illinois. A big part of the campaign was direct mail. This called for the first line of offense to be organized and put into operation. There were brochures and flyers to be folded and stuffed into envelopes. They had to be addressed and stamped. On a Sunday or two, my married sister Pauline and my 5 married brothers, plus 4 of us young children, gathered around the dining room table, 2 card tables, and jumped into action. Quite a task force, devoted and effective. After the second week of this phase, my married brothers and brother-in-law teamed up, 2 into a car, 3 cars, and for the next couple days each working their assigned portion of the legislative district, which consisted of LaSalle County, posted signs and posters along the well-traveled roads and at major intersections. Some tacked to trees, some on poles, and others standalone stakes in the ground. The campaign turned out successful, and now he was legislator in the House of Representatives, which met at the state capitol in Springfield. Later, with population shifts, our county was combined to others and became the 38th legislative district. Politically, Illinois was known as a Democratic state. My dad was Democrat, but his legislative district downstate, out of Chicago, was a pocket of Republicans. This was a rural district of good, hard-working farmers and small-town merchants. He was a farmer himself and would become known to represent his constituents. He did not graduate from 8th grade and had no higher formal education, but he knew what came out of the rear end of a bull and gave speeches in a way that those who elected him knew what he was saying. He spoke their language, and because of his courage, they knew he would fight on their behalf. There was always conflict with the large metropolitan district of Chicago, which had very different needs than the farmer and the small downtown businessman. As a freshman congressman, it was expected that you would keep quiet, observe, respect your elder statesmen, and learn how things are done. During his freshman term, a bill was proposed by a group from Chicago that would control the killing of animals in butcher shops to maintain a standard for cleanliness and health. It was known as the Slaughterhouse Bill. The bill required hot and cold running water in an enclosed facility with cement floor, drains, and walls that could be scrubbed down. You could see it was good for the big city, but it would be unlawful for a farmer to kill his own meat without such a facility. In a farm area, every farmer butchered his own animals: hogs, beef, and sheep. Chickens, ducks were killed and plucked in the yard behind the garage. You would cut the throat of a steer and hang it in the driveway of the corn crib where the overhead was sturdy. Then remove the hide and the innards. This was most always done in the fall or winter, so the meat could hang there, cool down, stay cold, and age properly. Then canned or later in time frozen. With hogs, bacon and ham were cured in the smokehouse. Other parts were preserved in salt brine, while the small items, ears and heart, were eaten soon while fresh. Pig's feet and knuckles in our house were pickled. Steaks, pork chops, and sausage, all of this meat was cut up and ground on the porch, in the basement, or on the kitchen table. How could my dad allow such a law to be forced upon a farmer? It may be needed in the big city, but would it be a great burden for the farmer? And wasn't he elected to represent them? The Slaughterhouse Bill was heatedly debated on the floor, and as at second reading, When came the third reading and time for the vote, my dad, who was strongly opposed to the bill, had talked to the Speaker of the House and requested that he be the last one to speak before the vote be taken. It was customary that if a representative couldn't be present at the time of a vote, they could leave a proxy vote with the Speaker, yea or nay. My dad knew it would be a close vote, and it was. It ended a tie. Then the Speaker said, "I have a proxy vote here, and it is yea. The bill passes." My dad stood up, got the floor, politely asked the Speaker to please read again the motion that was stated and to be voted on. The Speaker read, "Mr. Stremlau's motion was, I move this bill do not pass." My dad said, "And what was the proxy vote, Mr. Speaker?" He answered, "Yea," which was for the motion that the bill do not pass. The bill did not pass. The upstart freshman that had no 8th grade education always represented his people. He was elected 9 times, serving 18 years. Henceforth in Springfield, Joe Stremlau was known as Slauterhouse Joe. Bernie. My dad's bow tie. The year 1955 is impressed on my mind, a milestone that changed the course of my life forever. It's the year my first child was born. Everything in my life hinges on before or after that time. It created a feeling I'd never had before, nor ever quite experienced again, though I became a father 9 more times. With those, I was expecting it, and it always seemed to be accompanied with worry to detract from the joy. Even though each brought the realization of another miracle, a baby coming from the warm, snuggly, warm, quiet world of the womb, suddenly appearing in this world of light, air, and noise, I never reached the ecstatic feeling of that first time becoming a father. May 7, 1955 was not only the date my first child was born, it also was the date my parents' last child of 12 had his first child, a new grandchild from their youngest child. Is that what prompted them at age 65 and 63 to drive 1,800 miles from Mendota, Illinois to Key West, Florida? Somehow, that underscored how important this occasion was. Only later in my life did I realize how their action validated my feelings of this new life. To me, this act itself was worthy of note. I had been in Key West a year and a half and was a member of the Holy Name Society, an organization of Catholic men who met once a month. The Sunday this month for the meeting was at the time my folks were visiting, and because Dad was a state representative in the Illinois legislature, I arranged for him to speak at our group. July in Key West is warm. Our meeting room in the back of the restaurant was also quite warm. I introduced my dad, and when he stood up to start his address, he was wearing a light-colored blue-gray plaid short-sleeved shirt with a black bow tie. He began by explaining that he had an office in uptown Mendota, population 4,700, on the 2nd floor above a men's clothing store, a modest setting. His office was at the front with windows, and in the back was a photographer's studio. He and the photographer knew each other well, and one day the photographer approached him and asked to take his picture that the local newspaper wanted to accompany an article. My dad hesitated. He had come to work that day with no appointments and to do office work and not go out. He had no appointments for anyone. He reluctantly said, "I don't even have a tie on." The photographer immediately responded with a quick removal of his own tie, saying, Here, wear mine. As Dad explained this, he removed his tie to show how it was done, laid it on the table, opened the shirt collar, and went on with his remarks. Nothing more was said about it. Unobtrusively, his tie was off, his shirt collar was open. I've thought of this little incident many times in my life, how smoothly he got rid of that tie that hot day. I think of it now as a lesson from my father, overcoming an obstacle and simply moving on. A lesson to me without a word, purely a lesson by example. Bernie.